Today is Thursday, June 27th. I hope I can't see the date. And this is our monthly CSO chat, a webinar for the KdVS research community and patient community. And today our speaker is Miss Adalyn Kim. She is doing one of the most exciting projects that we have in KdVS right now. And that is developing a disease concept model for kids, young adults, and adults who are diagnosed with Koolen-de syndrome. We're going to go into a little bit about what disease concept models are, why they're important for the field, how they help shape and design future clinical trials or natural history studies, and how you guys as a patient community can start getting involved. So Adalyn and I are going to do this. Let me see if I can get my screen up. It's not the right one. Hold on here. These are all. Is this it? Oh, there we go. Ah, beautiful. Okay. Okay. We are going to do this very informally, basically to give everybody a chance, if anybody is watching live, and also myself, of course, a chance to ask questions instead of just sort of lecture style going through and waiting for questions and answers to the end. So both Adalyn and myself will discuss and review this specific slides. So without further ado, Adalyn, since I'm sharing my screen, you just sort of tell me next slide or whatever, and we'll go from there. Okay, go ahead.
All right. Hi. So thanks, Anna, for the great introduction. So before I go too far, I'd like to start the session to introduce myself a little bit, if that's okay. So my name's Adalyn. I go by my real name, or my current name is Dijon, but I go by Adalyn. You may notice my last name, I'm originally from South Korea. I went to University of Nebraska-Lincoln for my undergrad, and I'm currently a second-year student at Medical College of Wisconsin, studying genetic counseling program.
What did you study in undergrad, Adalyn?
Oh, I studied biochemistry. That was my major for my undergrad.
And how long is the genetic counseling program at Wisconsin?
2 years.
Ah, okay, so you're in your final year.
Yes.
Ah, awesome. Okay, and then so how did you pick genetic counseling?
Yeah, that's like my favorite question to be asked. So I can maybe share a little bit of my journey. So I was a senior in high school and I didn't know what to do after I graduate. So I was talking to my sister, and around the time she had a good friend who was in the genetic counseling program. And I got to talk with her and talk about the profession and what is genetic counseling is. So I got to know about this profession, and I was immediately fascinated about this profession. So that's how I started to become a genetic counselor. I'm not genetic counselor yet, but that's how I got interested in this profession.
But very soon. And so what is the thing, I'm going to put you on the spot. What is the thing that you're most excited about doing as soon as you're done with the program and you can start seeing patients or clinic patients?
Yeah, I can talk about that. Realize from my observation through the rotation, I see a lot of patient interaction with genetic counselor, and that's the main reason I love this profession. It's not something that you may go to doctor's office and maybe he or she tell you what to do, and that's all from the session. But then counseling session, we talk about, oh, how's that feel? We actually build up the relationship with the patient. So that's why I love this profession. And that's why I like the most looking for as a working as a genetic counselor.
That's awesome. That's great. That's a perfect reason. Okay, so that is a little bit on Adalyn. Let me see if I can get back to my slides. Okay, so diving right in. So I'm gonna set this up for Adalyn pretty well. This is a slide that I have probably showed on this exact same webinar probably 10 times already. But it just is sort of a really good schematic of what the drug development process looks like, going from figuring out the genetic diagnosis for a child or an adult, depending on how long that diagnostic odyssey takes. Going from left to right, you have various components on the drug development pipeline, but here, kind of in the middle here where my cursor is circling, is something called a disease concept or disease burden study. And so this is a really critical component of the drug development process. And this is exactly the study that Adalyn is doing right now for the KdVS community. Okay, so Adalyn, now I want you to explain a little bit about what it is, because I know when I started in this position for KdVS, I really did not have any good idea of what a disease concept model or conceptual model was.
Okay, yeah, I can speak to the explanation about the disease concept model. So the disease concept model, it's a framework that represents the comprehensive understanding of disease, including its cause, progression, symptoms, and impact, as well as the lived experience of an individual with Koolen-de and their family, which gathered through the qualitative interviews. And it moves beyond the simple list of clinical features. And this model serves as an important tool to help researchers, healthcare provider, and policymaker to understand and address the complexity of the disease, just like Anna talked about in the previous slide.
Next slide.
Next slide, please. So participating in this study, which offers a unique opportunity for you and your family to share your experience with Koolen-de, and this personal narrative help researchers understand the real world impact of this condition and providing the depth and context that are not captured through the traditional clinical research. And also, by participating in these interview studies, you help lay the necessary groundwork for future clinical trials. And these studies are critical initial steps in research, especially for rare disease communities, as they gather the detailed patient-centered data which is needed to design effective clinical trials. And the insight gained from these interview studies are invaluable in identifying specific areas where healthcare management can be improved. And for patients with the rare disease like Koolen-de and their families. So your participation directly contributes to enhancing the quality of care and support available to these communities. Next slide.
Perfect. Okay, that is a perfect introduction to showing some examples of different groups and different disorders that have done and completed and published their conceptual models previously in the literature. So these are just screenshots of a handful of papers that I found that were doing exactly this on different neurodevelopmental disorders. So this is a conceptual model that was done on Angelman syndrome that was published, about 5 years ago. And then 2 more recent papers on SLC6A1 related disorder, as well as STX BP1 related disorder. And I thought it might be helpful to just walk through what the results of studies like this can look like. Obviously each group and each paper sort of summarizes and analyzes their data a little bit differently. But the gist and the main takeaway message is always kind of the same. What are the most prominent symptoms that are being reported, and what is the range in symptoms that are being reported? And so I think on the next slide, I have some of the figures that I pulled out from the SDX-BP1 paper that was done through a genetic counselor program at CHOP. Okay, perfect. So this figure right here requires, it has a couple different bits and steps on it, but really, like I said, conceptual model papers, really the goal is twofold primarily, is to create this really broad landscape of all of the symptoms in KdVS, so Koolen-de syndrome, across the broadest range of disease severity. So individuals who are more mildly affected, more moderately affected, and more severely affected, as well as getting the broadest perspective in age, gender, and socioeconomic status, as well as other factors like geographic location, etc. And then the second piece to this that Adalyn really introduced already is that you evaluate the frequency of these symptoms, right? So not just what are the symptoms that people report during their interviews, but how often are they reported? And that is what this figure right here, which comes from the Sullivan paper, the team from CHOP. So this is not data for Koolen-de syndrome. This is for a different disorder, but is just as a means to show you an example of what the data ends up looking like and how it can be helpful. So you can see these are different symptoms that are laid out right here up and down the cursor, starting with developmental disability, intellectual disability, behavior seizures, expressive communication, etc. So it really ranges a variety of different domains, from neurological related symptoms, cognitive, communication skills, sort of other symptoms and systems that are impacted, like gastrointestinal, respiratory, things like that. And you can see across the bottom right here, the increasing numbers 0, 50, 100, 150, 200. That's really the number of times that a particular symptom that falls within this category was mentioned during the course of these interviews. And so you can see, as you would expect, probably is not a surprise, that things related to developmental delay or intellectual disability were mentioned with the most frequency in caregiver interviews. So across a broad range of interviews for this particular disorder, followed by issues with behavior, epilepsy, communication, etc. And then, a cool thing is they have included a couple anecdotal quotes here that just pulling out small passages from what caregivers have reported during their actual interviews. So talking about specifics and related to their, impairments in communication, issues with gastrointestinal problems, and then also respiratory infections or immune-related problems here. Then the other cool thing about this that they also did for this paper is that, the second piece to this is not just looking at patient symptoms, but is also looking at the impact of these symptoms on patients as well as caregivers. And so that's what these two graphs here, the top one here is the symptom impact on the patient. And then the bottom one in different green tones is the impact on the caregiver. So you can see here the same sort of idea is like, what are the sort of categories of issues that result from the different types of symptoms that KdVS patients have? So issues with general medical care, overall autonomy, socialization skills, schooling, sleep, puberty, regression, etc. And then the same scale here just tells you the amount of times that it's mentioned in the course of these interviews. And then the other thing, the second thing is different types of things that caregivers report on how they are directly impacted by having a child with this particular disorder. Again, this is not KdVS, but here you see that caregivers most frequently report issues related to emotional problems, support issues, daily life activities, family life, work, etc. So here is one of the last figures here, but I think is one of the coolest ones. And this is also from the same paper and the same group, but really one of the really important things about doing a disease concept model is you want to see how symptoms change over the course of disease and with age. You might not expect someone who has a toddler diagnosed with KdVS to have the same symptoms that somebody who's a adolescent or a teenager, even a young adult or an adult. So that's actually exactly what these still really colorful figures are showing is, on the left-hand side here are the patient symptoms. And the different tones of blue, or what is this, peach, red, and green, really show you the different symptom categories, right? Behavior, cognition, expressive communication, developmental delay, gastrointestinal growth, motor, seizures, tone. And then if you go left to right, you can see the frequency that these symptoms are reported in the age of the impacted individual. So for example, seizures are more highly reported or mentioned in these interviews when people have small babies or infants. And then, in childhood, seizures, you can see this line go down. Seizures are less mentioned in those caregiver interviews. And so this is a sign that, they're medically managed, or maybe seizures go away, etc. But you can just sort of see how the differences in symptoms that are reported really change depending on the age of the patient. And then sort of the same things for the symptom impacts and then caregiver impacts, how they change with the age of the patient. So these are all possible ways that you can look at this data. So good suggestions for Adalyn, what Adalyn might end up doing in her paper. Okay, finally. All right, Adalyn, now explain sort of what is involved in all of this work.
Okay, this is the brief overview of our study design. So we're starting from the literature review. This is where we are currently at. And then we recruitment of the participants for the interview. Then we do the interview with caregiver, educator, healthcare provider, and we get them all together and coding for the qualitative data. Then we do the analysis of the disease concept model, which include the caregiver impacts and the impacts on individuals. So in the next slides, I'll go into each of these points in more detail so you can have a better understanding of our approach and the rationale behind each step.
So before we go to the next slide, Adalyn, so because this is sort of an online study, like the interviews are done over Zoom or Teams or however, it's not limited to people who live in the US, and so people can be outside of the US and be part of the study?
Yes, sorry, I forgot to mention that it happened internationally, so it doesn't limit it to the US.
Oh, awesome. No, that's great. That's not always the case for a lot of our studies. Okay, good to know. Okay.
It's literature review, so it's a crucial step in our research process. So I know this is kind of busy spread and it's very complex, but I'm gonna explain each of them. So our goal from this process is to identify and analysis the symptom of Koolen-de disease as reported in the scientific literature. And this will help us determine the frequency of each symptom and create the comprehensive understanding of each condition. So on the left side, you can see on the slides, you'll see the list of symptoms associated with the Koolen-de virus. And the horizontal line, we have various pieces of scientific literature that has been published on the Koolen-de virus. So for each pieces of literature, we'll check off the symptoms that it mentioned on the paper, and which allow us to analyze the numbers of time each symptom is reported across different studies. So they're on the left side, I believe. There's a blue box that's showing the total number of
Okay, I see.
symptoms that was mentioned in the paper across the papers.
Mhm. So you go through PubMed or just find any papers that you can that are either directly mentioning or indirectly mentioning Koolen-de freeze, and you include them in this literature review. So here are different papers that you've read, and you go through one by one and check off all of the different types of symptoms that are mentioned.
Yes.
Wow. Okay. And how do you come up with your list of symptoms? Do you just add them as a new thing is mentioned in the paper, or do you have like sort of a master sheet?
Yeah, that was from the Combined Brain
Hmm.
organization. They have this beautiful literature sheet, so I can check off the box. And if that symptom are not listed on this beautiful sheet, I add them to the spread to make
Awesome.
sure I cover all the symptoms.
Wow. So how many papers have you read? This looks like a lot. This sheet keeps going.
Yeah, I've been done 20 literature papers, but
Wow.
there's more to cover.
Yeah. Wow. That's amazing. This must take a lot of time. Okay, cool. Anything else to say about this slide? This
Um,
is cool because it tells you're calculating how often it's reported too. So you can kind of, it'll be interesting to see if the rate at which symptoms are discussed in papers matches what caregivers end up saying the most or least.
yes.
Um, I wonder, I suspect that might be kind of a discrepancy, but it'll be interesting to see.
Yep, definitely.
Okay, let me see. Okay, so
Yeah, then we do the recruitment of participants, which, as I mentioned, it's happened by run internationally. And we do interview with not only caregiver, but also with the educator and healthcare provider, which give us the better understanding of the impact of this disease, these symptoms on individual with coronavirus in their daily lives. Uh,
yeah.
Next slide. So interview. So when we do interview, we are going to ask some open-ended interview questions. So as like general question about caregiver, educator, healthcare provider about their experiences. So for example, the example questions are like, tell me about your average day with your child. What does your morning routine look like? So specific question by participants' responses.
Mm.
We are going to ask you if that's okay to record this interview in the beginning. And after we get their consent, we're going to record all the interview. Then we transcribe this interview to our platform, and we are going to do the coding, which means that we are looking at all the symptom in a, I don't know how to explain this, Anna. Can
Oh,
you?
that's okay. I think we have it on the next slide. That's totally fine.
Okay.
It's perfect. So can you tell me why not ask specific questions? So you're doing a literature review and you know, for example, respiratory infections are a big deal, right? I'm just giving you an example. Why not ask about respiratory? Like, why not say, how often do you have infections?
Because it gives you a bias. They already know
Mm.
by giving that specific question. So we are not gonna ask specific, like the detailed question. We're gonna just ask you the broad question rather than specific.
So you just want them to sort of caregivers to tell you what
Yes.
a day in the life or a week in the life or whatever of a KdVS.
I don't want to give the information before
Mhm.
the
Okay.
answer. Yeah.
And then you transcribe everything. So like everything that's said gets written out. Uh,
Mhm.
okay. And then code terms. Okay. So you do this for all of them, just caregiver interviews, or do you do this for like the teachers, educators you have, and healthcare providers? The interviews all sort of treated the same, more or less?
All for all of them.
Yeah. Okay. Cool. So for health, like doctors, you just say, "Tell me what it's like to take care of a patient with KdVS," or
Yes.
like for educators, "Tell me what it's like to teach." Or okay, no, that makes sense. All right. Okay, so this is I am less familiar with this, but our team has been using this a lot, and so Adalyn, I expect you're going to become best friends with this program called Deduce.
Mm.
But I wanted to give people an example of what this coding looks like because I am not very familiar with doing this type of semi-qualitative, qualitative data analysis. But what you do, just like Adalyn said, is that after you have these interviews over Zoom, they're recorded, you upload the recording, and then this software can transcribe. Actually, I'm not sure if Deduce transcribes it or just codes it, but nevertheless, you get a complete transcription of everything that was said in the hour, hour and a half long interview with either the caregiver, educator, healthcare provider. And then what this program does is, there's some bits of manual entry that you have to go in and look for, but you can sort of use this software to pick up um, symptoms or topics or words or phrases that are mentioned throughout the course of the interview. And you have a coding key here, so you can put in the name, the age, sort of demographic information, and then at some point it will start to quantify and count the mentions, the number of times each symptom or impact, caregiver or patient impact is mentioned. So here are just some examples. There's no identifying information on this, and also this is not a KdVS person. This is just another disorder that we're using as an example. But it sort of goes through and it tells you here, it's mentioning brain abnormalities or bilateral hydroprocesses or issues with the corpus callosum. Some of these spelling, it's not perfect for spellings and transcription, but that's why you have an actual person going through and double checking it. But here you have mention of aspiration and feeding and having a G tube. So these are, those are issues related to, brain structure, neurological problems, or gastrointestinal feeding problems. So that's sort of how this program works. And then after you use Deduce and you've coded your data and you've had a second set of eyes, double check everything that's been pulled out of it, then you start making those beautiful figures like we saw in the team from CHOP for STX-BP1 related disorder. So this is a lot of work and seems like you're going to sit for a long time in front of looking at a screen for Deduce. Okay, but here, so this is the slide that I think is like, what is one of the main points or the two main points for doing a disease concept study? Like, why should we be really excited for this program or this study for our community?
Yeah, I can speak to that. So our first research question focused on identifying the range of symptoms associated with the Koolen-de virus. So by cataloging the symptoms, we can have a better understanding about this condition. Then we all also aim to determine which symptoms are most commonly reported in the literature review, and this will help prioritize the area of focus for both clinical attention and future research efforts. So another critical question is whether and how the symptoms evolve over time. So understanding age-related change in symptom presentation can guide the age-appropriate intervention and support.
Mm.
And lastly, we need to evaluate the effectiveness of current outcome measure used to assess these symptoms. So this will help us identify any gaps and area for improvement in our research methodology.
Well, I can't even see the last of my slides, or my words on that slide. Okay. Okay. All right. So here is like the nitty gritty on, let's assume everybody watching this is so eager to participate, and you're going to have thousands of people that sign up to do this, which you might actually, which is great. So who's eligible? And then like, yeah, who's eligible? What does participation look like? How much like time, money, effort, blood, sweat, and tears, that sort of stuff.
Okay, so for the inclusion criteria, the participants must have the confirmed diagnosis of Koolen-de syndrome. Sorry, this was the early morning, so my mouth is just not working currently, but I'm trying. And both caregiver of minor with Koolen-de and adults who are able to not and or adults who are able to consent to participation are eligible,
Mhm.
and genetic report confirming a clone-diverse diagnosis it is required for participation.
So you don't have to, so this includes anybody who's diagnosed with KdVS. KdVS, there's a couple different ways you can be diagnosed with it. There's individuals who can have sort of small changes to the KANZL1 gene, or they can have larger deletions just in a specific area of the 17th chromosome. So both, you're looking for both of those uh, genetic variants.
Yes, we are looking for both.
Okay. And age? Any age limits?
Um, I don't think we have age limit to this research. We, as long as we have the people who are like caregiver for the like the minors, because we are not able to have an interview with who's under 18, so it's maybe important for us to have.
You mean you can basically, there's no age limit as long as you can get either consent from the
Yes.
caregiver, or the affected individual can consent for themselves.
Yes, I think I kind of like mixing both.
No, that's okay. I just want to make sure we know, so when people ask us about this, we can tell them whether they can participate or not. Okay. Okay, so oops, here's a thing you put on the slide and I just asked that question. Oh, okay, go ahead. So any exclusion criteria?
Yeah, if the individual with pathogenic or like is there something variant or something change in the gene other than the cancel one, which is primarily cause of the clone-diverse, or those with the small deletion, small changes in other um, region of the gene will be not included in this research.
Okay, so if they have anything other, if they look on their genetic report and they have anything other than that sort of 17q2131 microdeletion or a cancel one variant, they are probably or most likely not eligible to participate.
Correct.
Got it. Okay. Okay. Next.
Yeah, since then okay, the next one is since our guideline and our documents are written in English, so it may be difficult to include the participants who are non-English speakers. So yeah,
Okay.
the the other exclusion is the participants must be able to complete the teleconference interview with me. So those who are not able or those who can't do the interview would be excluded from the study.
Okay. Okay. All right. And so who can participate? We talked a little bit about this, but who and like how much time is involved? like what's the burden on caregivers, educators,
Okay.
that sort of stuff.
So we are including both US-based and international participants to gather a diverse range of data. And participants will need to dedicate, that's about an hour and a half hours for the telephone conference interview. And this is all voluntary. So there's no I forgot the word compensate
Yeah.
for,
You don't get paid for your time. It's
yeah.
doing it out of the goodness of your heart. It's okay. Most caregivers are used to doing this.
Okay. And yeah, and participants will need to upload their genetic report. It's just as part of the study requirements.
One thing I'm thinking of is how does this apply to educators and healthcare providers? So obviously they don't have a genetic report to upload, but they just like consent for themselves to talk to you about their experience. And but still presumably the interview takes about the same amount of time.
Yes, I'm thinking the interview is going to take less time than caregivers since they're having a less time spending time with the person with Koolen-de. So I'm
Okay.
thinking to about an hour, but it really depends on how much time we talk
Yeah.
during
Okay.
the interview.
But obviously they don't have a genetic report, and they don't have to be an affected individual if and they don't have to have a genetic diagnosis of, KdVS. So this is basically inclusion exclusion criteria for caregivers,
Yeah.
right? Okay. Yeah, that makes sense. Cool. Okay, so what's like the next steps for participation? When can people actually start? Like, when do you think you're gonna start doing some of these interviews? And how?
Yeah. We plan to start recording participants in late summer to early fall of 2024. So this timeline maybe allow us to prepare and ensure we reach a diverse and comprehensive group of participants. So to do that, we need to include the variety of caregiver, educator, and healthcare provider with experience caring for individual with Koolen-de. So specifically, we are looking for caregiver of individual who are mildly affected, as well as those who are severely affected by Koolen-de. So this range will help us understanding the full impact of the syndrome. And also, it's important to include caregivers of both young children and adults with Koolen-de. So this provide the insight into how the needs and challenges evolve over time. And we are also include a caregiver of Koolen-de individuals from various racial and ethnic backgrounds to ensure the study captured a broad spectrum of experience and potential cultural influences as well.
Mm. Yeah, so we basically need people that represent all forms, severities, ages, as much diversity as we can to get the best picture of what KdVS could look like, right? Does that make sense?
Yes.
Okay, all right. So you are thinking that you'll be ready to start doing some of these interviews late summer, early fall. What's your goal? Just so we can sort of get an idea of how many people we should send your way from like Ashley and I get notified. Do you have a goal for how many of each type, how many caregivers, how many educators, how many healthcare providers?
Yes, I was thinking for the caregiver, we are thinking 18 to 20.
Okay.
And healthcare provider, we are looking for two to three
Okay.
interview. Then educator, oh, maybe 2 to 3, including educator. So maybe healthcare provider and educator, we are looking for 2 to 3.
Okay. And And is there any reason for those healthcare providers to be of different specialties? Like, do you want a pediatric neurologist, and then do you want an immunologist or a rheumatologist, or do you want an epileptologist?
Okay. Um,
Um,
yeah, I know that we can take the uh, it doesn't have to be a specific healthcare provider. It can be anything. It can be physician, nurse,
okay.
genetic counselor, physical therapist, occupational therapist, speech therapist, or other healthcare profession. But the only
Got it.
thing is they have to have experience with Koolen-de.
Okay, that sounds like we have a lot of flexibility. Okay. Um, okay. So, right, if you're watching this recording and you're interested in nominating, or you think your child or your adult, cool kid, cool adult might be interested, I would say the first steps really are reaching out to Ashley or myself or both of us, and just making sure we put your name on the list when we are ready to get recruitment and enrollment underway. Um, I think this is important to mention because Adalyn just said that her goal is somewhere between 18 to 20 caregiver interviews. So we have KdVS community. I don't know, you probably don't have a lot of experience with them quite yet, Adalyn, but you will soon. They're very active, and are very eager to help. There's been a lot of excitement, a lot of movement in the research and translational neuroscience field and clinical research community. So I expect that there will be a much greater response than probably just 20 people. So whoever's listening, not if you put your name in the hat, we can't obviously do this study on everybody, but we would love for as many people who think they're willing and have the time to volunteer for this really important study. We would love for you to offer that up. And I think, Adalyn, do you have anything else to add?
Um, not, no, I don't think I have anything.
Okay, that's fine. All right, I don't see any questions right now. Well, Adalyn, I'm really excited for you to start this study. I know I've said this about 5 times already just now, but this is a really important part of, developing and identifying the right outcome measures to include in clinical trials and natural history study. And both of those things, I think, are very soon on the horizon for this community. So I'm grateful that you are willing to take on this project and do that for the foundation and the KdVS community. Ashley, do you have any questions? I think Ashley is multitasking, but
I'm here.
okay.
Been listening the whole time. No, I think you guys did a great job explaining it, and I think that people will be very excited to participate.
Yay.
Thank you for all this work.
Awesome. All right. Well, thank you, Adalyn, for your time. I am going to stop sharing my screen, and we'll be back next month with another webinar, another exciting presentation.
Thank you both.